Okay, so we're going to talk now about developmentally appropriate care of the school-age child. First, physical growth and development. Growth is beginning to slow down now, and it's this slow, gradual growth in weight and height until they hit that pre-puberty growth spurt. When they hit that growth spurt, then they usually have a big jump. Now, some kids, that growth spurt starts with height, so they really stretch out. Some kids, that growth spurt starts with weight, so they start to get pudgy, and then their height kicks in and they stretch that out. Be aware of that and make sure you don't confuse that with developing excessive weight. Girls and boys are similar in size and strength through the school age years. Boys are slightly larger on average, but there's not very much difference in size and strength until puberty. Body proportions for school age kids look more like an adult. Their limbs are longer, their center of gravity moves down. They get more coordinated, the torso slims down, so they start to lose that chubby baby toddler look and slim down typically. Their strength increases with their growth, but they don't have a massive increase in muscle mass or strength until puberty. Their body systems start to mature and become more regulated. The GI metabolic systems, they have fewer stomach upsets, so they're less likely to, they're able to handle foods more easily. The stomach capacity increases and their blood glucose regulates somewhat, so they can move to a pattern usually of 3 meals a day, maybe with fewer snacks. Sometimes they still need some snacks, and I can tell you that a lot of school lunch schedules are based on limited space, and so a kid might go to school and eat lunch at 10:30 a.m. So waiting until 6 p.m. for dinner is really too long. So that after school snack may still be important for a lot of kids. Caloric needs decrease in relation to their size because their growth is slowing. So a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old needs more calories than a toddler, but in relation to their size, that goes down. And their teeth around early school age, their teeth start to, their baby teeth start to fall out and they get adult teeth. Urinary system, the bladder capacity increases. That usually happens earlier for girls than for boys. Some kids who are toilet trained in the day may continue into the school age years to have bedwetting. What you need to know about bedwetting is it is almost always a physiologic issue. It's not psychologic. It's not an indicator of abuse. It's not behavioral most of the time. It is almost always physiologic, and it's connected to having a smaller bladder capacity, being a heavy sleeper, and a delay in nocturnal production of ADH or antidiuretic hormone. So those 3 things, if they have any combination of those, the risk goes up. One thing to be aware of though, if kids have been dry at night and begin bedwetting, they need to be evaluated for a physiologic cause such as UTIs or diabetes. Cardiovascular system, the heart actually starts to grow more slowly in relation to the body, and so sometimes that leads to some fatigue. The heart rate decreases as they mature, and as they get larger, the blood pressure increases. The respiratory rate decreases. They're less susceptible to respiratory infections than younger kids, and the severity of those illnesses starts to decrease for most kids. So we're kind of out of the sick all the time, get a cold every other week, preschool years. Now, you will sometimes see kids who have been home with one caregiver and not exposed to a lot of kids, may not have had very many colds during the preschool years. When they move into school age, then they may start having frequent colds because they're kind of catching up in terms of exposure and immunity. The immune system is more competent and more effective. But again, they may have those more frequent infections in the early school years, especially if they were not exposed to things when they were younger. The musculoskeletal system, the bones continue to ossify. Earlier in the school age years, a broken bone is more likely to be a green stick fracture. because the bone still has some flexibility. So one side of the bone may break and the other side bend. That's called green stick. Later, those fractures tend to be more complete fractures. So the bones continue to ossify. The musculoskeletal system is still immature though, and they can have bone and joint injuries because of excessive weight. So we're actually seeing now some school age kids lifting weights, and that's not recommended before puberty, because that can cause bone and joint damage. But also sometimes book bags are very heavy. A child might be carrying near their own weight in books on their back, and that can actually cause some damage as well. Prepubescence is one piece of physical development we need to address because it varies a lot. It may start a lot earlier in some kids than in others, but we're talking about the 2 years before the onset of puberty. So frequently kids have a growth spurt. They may gain weight first or look like they are thicker or pudgy first and then stretch out, but they have a growth spurt. They may begin to show a few secondary sex characteristics, especially for girls. Girls usually begin showing some signs of prepubescence around 9 years old. Boys are often slightly later. When we talk about averages, there are always kids that are going to be below and above that. So kids who are late bloomers, who are not showing those secondary sex characteristics, not having that growth spurt, not having some signs of onset of puberty until later than their peers, there may be a lot of social consequences of that. They may have a hard time feeling like they fit in. Sometimes they may be picked on or bullied for that. And so that can be really difficult. They can also have a hard time finding clothing that is age appropriate. So think of a middle school, maybe 14-year-old child who is looking for clothing, and everything that fits them has dinosaur and flower and designs on it, or things like that. They have childish designs or clothing because that's the size they're in. So they can have difficulty finding clothing that feels like it's age appropriate to them. Kids who are early bloomers, who begin developing earlier, have some additional risk. They may also be bullied or picked on some, but there's also the risk for those kids of being perceived by adults as being older than they are. And so that can mean differences in expectations. If you have a 10-year-old who looks 14, then they may be expected to act more mature like a 14-year-old. But also it can put them at risk for sexual abuse and grooming. Okay, in the next section, we're going to talk about the developmental theories in school-age children.